Broadcast is live.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Welcome to KLF Bhava Samvad. Good afternoon from India, and good morning and good evening wherever you're watching from. Kalinga Literary Festival welcomes you to its Bhava Samvad platform, which has reached to more than 1 million viewers in last 4 months. So this session today is an important session with two important luminaries in literature and academia. We have with us Michiel Bass, who is a renowned anthropologist who will be talking about his book and his work in India and elsewhere as well. His very popular book, Muscular India, has been on the front pages, in the middle pages, in the back pages of many, many leading newspapers of India and the website. He is getting fantastic reviews about his excellent groundwork, ethnographic work on India. We have Dr. Aruni Kashyap, who is a professor at Georgia University, and he brings in years of experience in creative writing. And Aruni Kashyap, I'll read the brief profile for everyone's benefit. Let me start with Michiel Bass. Michiel has a PhD in anthropology from the University of Amsterdam, has held various academic positions with the National University of Singapore, Nalanda University Rajgir, the International Institute for Asian Studies Leiden, and the University of Amsterdam. Most of his work centers on the Indian middle class. He has published extensively on the topic of fitness and bodybuilding in India, Indian student migration to Australia, the migration trajectories of skilled professionals as well. So let me come back to Dr. Aruni Kashyap, who is a creative writing professor. Aruni Kashyap is a writer and translator. He is the author of His Father's Disease of Westland Books, India 2019, and the novel The House with a Thousand Stories, Penguin Random House. He has also translated from Assamese and introduced celebrated Indian writer Indira Goswami's last work of fiction, The Bronze Sword of, if I can read that name rightly, Thingpakri Tehsildar. He won the Charles Wallace India Trust Scholarship for Creative Writing to the university. So very fine individuals who have got excellent track records in academia, in creative writing, in ethnography, and very, very excited to welcome both Michiel and Aruni to this exceptionally exclusive session by KLF Bhava Samvad. As the name suggests, Bhava Samvad in Sanskrit refers to connecting to the feelings of people around the world in the times of lockdowns and shutdowns. So Bhava is feeling, Samvad is the dialogue. So whatever you are feeling today and why you are feeling today, two people connecting to the world and two people connected with themselves. So here, Michiel connects with us through his book, through his work, and Dr. Aruni connects all of us through his work and through his book, and both will be interacting with each other about their own work and finding out how we move forward in the times of difficulty as like COVID. I'm Kamalakant Das from the Kalinga Literary Festival. Thank you and welcome to Kalinga Literary Festival's award-winning platform, Bhava Samvad. Welcome, Michiel. Welcome, Arunisa.
Thank you, Kamala Das, for that wonderful introduction and very generous introduction. I also would like to take the privilege of displaying the book. It has this wonderful cover, and I have been reading it this week, and it also attracts a lot of attention from people. They're like, "What is this book about?" And what because it's a tiger and there's a man in underwear, and he looks like a bodybuilder. Whenever I have sort of stood out outside in my patio, and my neighbors have asked me, like, what is this book about? It looks very attractive, very interesting. Michiel, you are teaching at the University of Amsterdam right now, if I'm not wrong. And I'm going to ask you to talk about your book in a little bit. But before it went live, you were telling me that you designed a lecture called Querying the City, and you have spent a lot of time in Delhi. So I was wondering, if somebody asks you to provide a queer perspective of Delhi, and this is the Delhi that is probably not very visible, but this is the Delhi that or people from lower middle class people know, or underclass people know. This is a Delhi that doesn't really is not vocal in the upper class sections mostly. So if I ask you to queer Delhi, how would you design your lecture? What would you say?
Well, we actually do talk about Delhi quite a bit in the lecture. So the title of the lecture is Loving the Global City, and it's all about human relationships within the city. And the way we talk about Delhi is in terms of its world-class city ambitions, which are now a few years old. So the idea of Delhi, sort of growing, developing, and increasingly being another sort of global city like Singapore or Hong Kong with a lot of international businesses. So a lot of that is, of course, about attracting businesses, multinationals, expats, and that really relates to kind of sort of the higher end professional that India is also known for, that a city like Bangalore, for instance, is known for its IT professionals. So the story I try to tell, partly about Delhi, because the book is not just about Delhi, is about lower middle class men who are not necessarily part of that narrative of world city becoming so they're generally from vernacular backgrounds, vernacular lower middle class or labor class backgrounds, and they're trying to climb the ladder of middle class belonging. They're trying to become more middle class than initially we might think they are. So when it comes to the concept of queer, and I actually only use that in the final chapter of the book, I also, of course, use that as a prism to interrogate questions of inequality and access. How does it actually work where you come from a vernacular background, maybe not from the city center, maybe not from South Delhi, but instead from, semi-rural, semi-urban Uttar Pradesh? You've made your way into the city. How does it actually work if you want to climb the middle class ladder? And what kind of constraints do you need to negotiate about the way?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you think queerness plays a part in this? Because we are talking about queering the city. What kind of role queerness plays a part in the middle class as aspirational ladder?
So in the final chapter in the book, I talk a little bit about the homoerotics of social media updates and what people actually read in Muscular Bodies. And of course, partly that is exactly what you see here on the cover as well. What you see is an attractive young man posing in the middle of the city in his chaddies. He does so in front of one of the murals. So this picture was actually taken by Kop Shiva, who's a friend of mine, and he's an artist. He's a Bangalore-based artist, and he photographs internal migrants from India in the city. So people new groups have made their way in the cities, and they're not all bodybuilders. Some of them are singers, some of them are construction workers, and it can be any person who's moved to the city and thinks of the city as the place of his dreams. And of course, what he does here, and this is why I picked this picture, is because he poses very proudly in front of a mural in an unknown place in the city, and the city is his. He very clearly shows, like, I'm here to stay. This is my city too. But of course, he's originally from Bangalore, but coming from a more provincial background, he faces all sorts of hardships coming to bigger cities where he might not be used to all the codes and the norms of those who've been middle class for much longer. So what makes this queer? Of course, in the final chapter, I also talk about questions of sex work, of how they are preyed upon by other men or by women, how the body is made attractive, but it's not necessarily what the whole book is about. The book itself is really about inequality of processes of inclusion and exclusion and what it means to be middle class.
Thank you so much. That was actually my next question, like more to talk more specifically about the book, but I'm going to rephrase the question. I want you to throw some light on this 10 years of research that you have done. When was that moment that you decided that I'm going to spend 10 years with bodybuilders and and people from like gyms, people from akharas, and about them? When was that moment? What was that moment?
Well, you know, the long answer short to that is that there was never that moment. The one thing I do as an anthropologist, I firmly believe that if you truly want to understand anything about society, you need to be there for the long haul. A lot of stuff that has been written about New India was written in a hurry because I guess in a bid to keep pace with the very development as it is perceived in India itself. So if you want to write about changing India, you need to rapidly write it because otherwise you're already behind on the latest developments. And a lot of very good books have come out and a lot of not so great books, but there's a whole library on changing India now. But having looked into different aspects of changing India over time, such as IT professionals in Bangalore, I've written about that. I've written about student migrants in Australia, of mid-level skilled migrants in Singapore from India, and all sorts of in-between topics. I also realized that if I ever really wanted to capture this idea of India becoming, since economic liberalizations in 1991 and 50 years of independence in 1997, which are both, I guess, very important moments in Indian history when kind of the new India started taking off. If I wanted to capture that in a better way, I realized that I had to spend a lot more time with my informants trying to get a sense of how their lives were really changing. And I guess along the way, what I became interested in is this incredible fitness boom, which initially caught me by surprise. And I think it caught a lot of people by surprise because around 2002 and 3, when I used to be invited to IT companies by friends, I knew they had fitness centers that were very highly equipped, such as the Infosys campus in Bangalore had a fantastic gym. But I didn't really see it anywhere else. Then suddenly, coming back to India time and again, I thought, what are all these gyms doing here? Who works here? Who works out here? I mean, the first question with a gym is always who goes here, right? But then I thought also they must be having employees. And the moment I stepped in these places, there were all these young guys working there and were fitness trainers. And I started wondering, where do they come from? So, and obviously then Bollywood is an important influence here because there were a couple of movies that really set the tone for the fitness industry. Om Shanti Om with Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan's performance in Gajini were very, very influential movies in this regard. So the way I work is also I pick up on developments and I just keep a logbook for myself, an archive of things that I find interesting. And I must admit that I'm not always certain why something picks my fancy or interest in a certain way. Oftentimes, I just find myself collecting. To give you a final example, I know I'm rambling on, but in 1997, when I had a student job with a bookshop at Central Station here in Amsterdam, this was a year that India celebrated 50 years of independence. And suddenly all these international magazines were reflecting on how India had changed. And I remember very clearly being fascinated by that idea. Although I'd never been in India before, I thought, but why do they capture India in this light? And how have I known India as a young rural boy? Like, how have I grown up with the idea of India? And I just started collecting these magazines, thinking that at some point there must be a use of this. And I still have them till this day.
Wow, that's a really fascinating incident. I really know what you're talking about. Actually, after finishing grad school in Minnesota, I actually returned to India to start working. It was in 2014, and obviously I had a lot of anxiety about how I'm going to look in class, of course, because I was 6 years younger than I am right now. So I decided to join a gym with another friend of mine, and there was a gym trainer there, and and my friend also was a returnee from the US. She had worked for many years in the US, and we both decided that enough is enough. We want to go back home. We will live in Guwahati in our vacations, if at least if possible. And then he was extremely curious about how to go to US, and we both, having grown up with middle class privileges, the only way we went was apply for a scholarship, get it or not get it, apply again, and then go. Like that was our only way outside India. Like nobody ever took us even to Delhi for a vacation, probably, because that doesn't happen very often in lower middle class or middle class Assamese families. But this guy was, he would call me, and he obviously he knew his boundaries, because he knew he couldn't call a woman just randomly, but he used to call her Didi, can you tell me what is give me a tips, when are you going next, can I come in with you? We were almost annoyed by that thing. And then after
Yeah.
a couple of years, it was my cousin who I saw being born in 1994 or 1995. That boy suddenly puts up all these muscular photos on Facebook that gets a huge social media following, and I realize, and they're all obviously in underwears. So and I see him in a different shape, and attire at home, and suddenly I see a different size of him. So I completely know what you're talking about and who you are talking about. So I was just wondering, that even though you say Bollywood as a primary and the initial influence, what else is? Could you like to tell us about what else is driving? What are the other inspirational, examples
Mm.
of these men? Because of course Salman Khan is a big influence. Then
Yeah.
it became almost a competition between the Khans. Now every new
Three
hero,
cans.
three
Three. Yeah.
Khans, right? Right now, you do talk about this romantic movie. I forget this name in the introduction, but I have watched the movie. I just the
Om
name
Shanti Om or
before the Salman Khan movie.
PR.
Pyar Ke Dharna
Yeah.
Kiya.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pyar Ke Dharna Kiya.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. That was like that was the time when Salman Khan was taking off his shirt at every
Yeah.
scene. He couldn't wear a shirt, as if there was some kind of itchiness on his body. And then
Yeah.
now, 2020, 2015, we see every Bollywood hero, every person
Yes.
on the media is ripped. It
Yeah.
was not like that before. But at the same time, I'm wondering, apart from Bollywood, what else is the inspiration to be ripped? To who are the who are the idols for these men?
Mm. Well, in many ways, I think the idol is the city itself, or India itself. So you must understand that a lot of this is about the promise of transformation. So obviously, what Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan have really done, and Amir Khan is really the king of transformation in that sense, that every movie has kind of sort of part of the story is not the movie itself, but actually the road he has walked towards transformation. And Dangal being a very interesting example there, because he actually goes almost like back in terms of bodily shape. It's no longer coming from a fit young man to become a muscular, but first he puts on weight, then he goes back and becomes a younger self of him. So the idea of transformation is obviously what fitness trainers also promise their clients who, like me, are struggling with being overweight, with all sorts of health related issues, with sedentary lifestyles, overconsumption, which is all what India now is about as well. But of course, the West is also about overconsumption. So we're all dealing with these kind of things that we're not fit. We don't look our best selves. Fitness trainers might have the key to unlock that potential in you. And of course, their bodies partly are also about showcasing that. I mean, they might be able, through their muscular bodies, what they're showing you is, and this, I'm returning to Abhishek, what he is showing you is that he was able to build this magnificently muscular body. So maybe he can do that for you, Aruni, or maybe he can do that for me. So, in many ways, what that resonates with is the very potential that India offers them itself. They are living part of an India that is rapidly changing. These men usually have walked a trajectory away from their families. Not that they're no longer in touch with their families, but they're doing something radically different. And they're first of their generation to do something radically different. They've become fitness trainers. Their fathers have never been fitness trainers. So they've done something else. And often that also comes with certain ideas of sexuality and gender. They've really rethought themselves and have become successful in the big city. So if you look at their trajectories, one thing you see is that they often use metaphors to describe themselves that resonate with this rapidly changing urban landscape, in which they themselves are, of course, success stories. Their lives aren't just successful, though. I mean, obviously they're full of hardship and struggles and negotiating that. But of course, at a skin level, at a very superficial level, they are incredibly successful because they've accomplished something that you and I and virtually anybody else that we see on the street haven't accomplished, but which at the same time is being celebrated in Bollywood movies up to a point that you, like you said, every Bollywood movie does it. And it's not just Bollywood. Obviously, it's also Kollywood, Tollywood, Sandalwood, Bengali cinema. Everything is about this now. That I just had a brief conversation with Puneet Rajkumar, who is one of Sandalwood's biggest heroes. And obviously, he does the same in Bangalore, sort of Kannadiga cinema. He's obviously known for being a very fit man. And there's no avoiding that for them anymore. So trainers build upon that. That's also part of their success story. Yeah.
Right. I think there was a moment and I think there was a moment when in Bollywood when I think the men started displaying their muscles, and it was very. I remember that it was not like that when I was growing up, and now to show the muscles, to show yourself. Yourself in the six packs is the most common thing, even in Assam film industry, which was I see the Instagrams of these people, and also there's also a huge mushrooming of influencers. If I go to social media, especially Instagram, these influencers are also trying to get clients who would go on a diet plan with themselves. With these people, and they are posting constant pictures of themselves all the time. I was wondering if you met any such influencers, or even these influencers sometimes even would sell products on Instagram nowadays. DM for queries, DM for collaboration, and so on will be their bios on Instagram. So I was wondering if you met any of those men as well, who are fitness consultants, diet consultants, and also are influencers.
I think most of them are all of that, especially the more successful ones. As I explained in the book as well, is that one of the reasons, of course, beyond Bollywood immediately and Men's Health magazine for a while, one of the big reasons of the popularity of fitness is social media, because where else can you take your shirt off? You can't really do that at Khan Market in Delhi or on MG Road in Bangalore. No, you need to have a reason for that. So beyond the gym, if you just think about it, where can you show off that body to everybody to behold and be admired? We didn't really have that 20 years ago. With social media, it's really created a platform where it's perfectly okay. And just take in your mind your cell phone in hand and step up on MG Road. If you would meet a guy there in Bangalore without his shirt, you would think he's nuts. But that same man you can literally encounter on your phone on MG Road, and he would be shirtless, and you would find it perfectly normal. It's still the same guy, it's still the same body, it's still the same underwear, but it has normalized. So we've come to think of that as a normal thing to do, where you go online, and most people can be used in all sorts of situations. And so social media really offers most of these men a platform to showcase their bodily developments. This is also where they keep track of what they've accomplished over time. And this is, of course, also the part where the tool that convinces their potential personal training clients that they are able to transform their own bodies, and thus, by default, maybe yours as well. So social media is incredibly important. And I think if you look at a professional fitness trainer as it exists in India, but elsewhere as well, there is always a conflation between being fitness trainers, being health gurus, people who give you dietary advice, but also life coaches in many ways. In the gym, they're generally the person that you're quite honest to. It's almost like you're meeting your therapist. You kind of know it stays between the walls of the gym. And it's where you can be open about all your concerns, like I'm a little fatty, or, I'm struggling with diabetes, or there's something else going on. So the trainer also is that kind of a go-to person in many ways, that within all that madness of a changing urban landscape, with all its demands of professionalism and shadis to get ready for, and other events, that you go to your fitness trainer. So they are influencers, they are fitness gurus, health gurus, etc. And of course, when it comes to influencers, they're generally also the persons that might be selling protein powder, supplements, and everything else. They get endorsement deals for fitness clothing and all sorts of other things. Yes.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a probably darker, serious question. But before that, I wanted to ask you: have you met that fitness trainer or that person who is the bodybuilder and wants to convert you? I have met quite a few of them, and they're so well-meaning and so innocent in some ways, and they look at me and you must be so unhappy, and you must be wanting to change your body. So that's what the issue. And they kind of. I became friends with this guy who wanted some help in terms of like his applications in MA English, not even big. So I said, "We did this." He came over because he is a brother of a friend, and then he was after my life, what I should buy, how I should buy measuring scales in my kitchen, and what I should eat. He said, "I will, Bhaiya, I will change you in 6 months." 6 months, and and he sent me his before and after pictures, and I had to block him eventually because I was not interested in going to the gym or eating with a measuring scale in my kitchen. So I was wondering if you met so many of them. Has any of those tried to convert you, like, convince you into a different lifestyle?
Yeah, different lives. I mean, obviously, that's what they are about. I mean, that's their capital, right? I use the term bodily capital in the book quite a lot, as opposed to social capital or economic capital. I mean, their capital resides with their bodies. They've put a lot of money, time, and effort in it, and that's also what they sell to potential clients and how they make money. I think it's well-meaning. I think we shouldn't quite forget that fitness trainers are often dependent for their income, their livelihood, on personal training clients. And when they work in gyms, part of that money is taken by the gym. So they're encouraged to bring in clients who sign up for packages within the gym. So they're used to selling themselves that way, and encouraging you to sign up for their transformative capacity. And obviously they saw something in you, and I thought, well, if I tell Aruni this, he might actually listen and he might actually be willing to do that. But you touched upon something very interesting there, and we often forget about this as well when we admire these bodies and we think like that might be possible for ourselves. There is, of course, a reason that almost everybody fails in emulating this model. And that has to do exactly what you just said. You don't want to go into the kitchen and weigh all your vegetables and your proteins and live that kind of life, because the lives I've followed over the years are extremely controlled. They're extremely specific in what they eat, what workout they will do, how they regulate their lives. And that is a real talent, a real skill that most of us don't have that in us, to actually work towards building a body in such a way you can't really let go. This is also one of the reasons that you often see that the younger lot that I've met when they get married, and recently one of my informants did, and I just noticed a picture online, and I could see how easy it is to let go, because he always used to be incredibly fit, and that fitness is definitely gone post-marriage, because for the next year or so you have to visit your relatives, you have to eat what you're being offered as a sign of respect, you'll have lots of sweets and candies. All of that immediately deviates from the diet you're used to, and that is, of course, in the end, the real challenge. So I get where it's coming from. Yeah.
Looks like he's having a very happy food year of eating and food and enjoying.
I'm not sure if it's what informants would often also tell me. Bodybuilders would say, like, I'm postponing marriage for the coming years because I know that when marriage comes up, I have to let all of this go. I mean, it won't be maintainable for me in the long term. And this then shows you, of course, the kind of struggles that you and I and everybody else is dealing with on a day-to-day existence. You know, you can stick with it and be super precise, and then that might might have that result. But if you don't, you're just going to be like you and I and everybody else in the street.
Right. I just told you that I would come into the darker side of this business, and I think your 10 or more years of experience has sort of confronted you with a lot of people, a lot of examples. I wanted to know, like, what are the pitfalls of this allure? What are the pitfalls of this success? What is the darker side of that? How people suffer eventually after they achieve the success?
Yeah. Well, I think health concerns are huge among fitness trainers and bodybuilders. Part of this has to do with the risk-taking behavior. This is not only about steroids and growth hormones, which I'll be coming back to later, but also actually very much the reality of sticking to highly precise diets, using diuretics towards competitions to become more dry, and all these other things that might actually might not be that great for your health to do extreme dieting. Everything that is extreme is not necessarily good for your body. And any top athlete, whether it's somebody who's now performing Tour de France or a runner, might recognize that it takes a toll on your body. I think one thing you see more with trainers and bodybuilders is that none of it is particularly well regulated. So where if you're into wheel running, you're a wheel runner, you're in the Tour de France, they all have very highly specific sports associations and federations. Bodybuilding and fitness is much more loosely regulated, so it doesn't come with the kind of professional protection that you would associate with a high performance sport. That bodybuilding is definitely a high performance sport. There's no joking about it. This is not just something you can pick up. It takes years and years of preparing, and then you shine on stage, and it comes with consequences. And of course, bodybuilding has always been associated with steroids and growth hormones, which is the other aspect of it that poses serious health risk. I must say, interacting with bodybuilders, I won't say that I endorse them. I never will. I've never endorsed drugs in my life, but I can see how bodybuilders also argue that we all do things that are not necessarily healthy. We smoke, we drink, we eat too much, we take all sorts of health risks ourselves. So in that sense, you can think of steroids and hormones also as another health risk that you're willing to take with your own body. Of course, the challenge here, though, is that it's, especially in India, very hard to know what it is you're actually using. And this is something that emerged time and again during interviews, that people said, I don't mind using steroids or hormones, but I wish I knew what I was actually taking. So there's over-reliance of certain gurus, certain senior people who might supply you with something of who you have to believe that he knows what he's doing. And this poses a real risk. And that's a broader risk in India in general, where you see that issues of food, adulteration, etc., leads to a lot of stress, a lot of concerns about whether or not what you're doing is actually healthy or not, if you can trust a particular brand or product for what it is. And one anecdote is always about protein powders. Like, fitness trainers generally don't buy protein powders from Kirana shops or even shopping malls, because they say part of the product will be supplemented with an inferior product or simply dough or something. So how do you go about that, and how do you navigate that? And what I do in the book, I basically use that also metaphorically to explore all sorts of uncertainties that people might experience in the city.
Right. I also wanted to hear if you are an anthropologist, but I was wondering if, I think this is rampant among bodybuilders, and also the new, definitely body image issues and mental health issues are so intrinsically related. And obviously in our society, women suffer the most because of that, because women's bodies are put to test to a certain unrealistic standard by the media, by family, by people all the time. And suddenly, like, this is a big problem also among men, and the men in South Asia, in India. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, like, and how
Yeah.
are you tackling this? And most importantly, I think going and seeking counseling is still a very, very upper middle class and elite and upper class exercise.
Yeah.
To go to a counselor and to talk about one's distress and things that are bothering them is just unheard of, not even a taboo. I can't imagine that happening in lower middle class families. Also, therapy is expensive. Good therapy is very expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
Experienced therapies are not available in India. So
So,
how is
yeah,
it
well,
handled? How are they
well,
dealing?
mental health issues are definitely part of the book, especially questions of suicide. So the second chapter in the book tackles this when one of my long-term informants who actually hailed himself from a well-off family, but he himself had decided to not follow in his father's footsteps and take over the family business there into typical South Delhi family involved in construction, upper middle class, English educated. He decided to become a gym trainer. And in the end, the pressure of family and all sorts of other factors contributed to him taking the decision to take his own life. And in the second chapter, I explore that also as a way of reflecting a bit deeper on how much space for mobility does Indian society offer you, not just physical mobility, but simply the question of doing something different, because almost all the trainers and bodybuilders I met emphasize that in their personal narratives, that they are doing something radically different from their parents, and that produces stress. And of course, in the lives of fitness trainers and bodybuilders, that is further aggravated with all sorts of ideas about their bodies. The bodies need to look certain way. You're constantly facing a mirror in which you see your body reflected, and you think like, is this not truly the body I was always after? And somewhere further down the book, I give this example of one guy he's actually an IT professional in Chennai, very highly qualified person. He runs a team, but he's also an aspiring bodybuilder. And at some point, we sit in his company canteen, and he asked me, said, Michael, what would you do? What would you do if you were in my case? Because he's contemplating doing growth hormones. And I still remember this very well. I was looking at him and I thought, you're asking me? I mean, for one, he's an incredibly accomplished bodybuilder, a very tall person. Obviously, half of the canteen is staring at how good he looks, but he can't see that himself anymore because he is still thinking of how he might shine on stage one more time, how we might really showcase his potential. But of course, thinking about what is your ultimate form is something that always exists beyond the horizon. So there is another way of getting there. There is always a next step to be taken. There is always a bigger guy in the room, a more muscular person, a more accomplished person. And if you see, one of the other stories that I highlight in the book is of a bodybuilder from Bangalore, and he came back from a competition in Mongolia, which is actually a place where in Ulaanbaatar, a lot of competitions are held. And he realized that he's an incredibly muscular guy. He's huge. There's no doubt about it. Any person encountering him would realize how enormous he is, how muscular. So on the Indian stage, he's super accomplished. But he went to Mongolia and he said, there I realized that it wasn't so. I was actually one of the smaller guys in the room. And he also realized that he needed to face the question himself whether or not he truly wanted to become bigger and what that would entail. And if he even had that in him, if he was willing to take the health risk and what he would get out of that. And so there you see all these predicaments unfold. So for him, and he's a guy who's very much together. So he was actually able to ask himself that question, thinking, now I need to think about this. But for a lot of the other men, and throughout the years that I've been involved in this research, I've seen people pass away, commit suicide. I've heard plenty of such stories because it all makes an impact. But it's, again, and I need to emphasize this too, that's of course a minority. The case I highlight in the second chapter, where one of the trainers commits suicides, there are all sorts of factors that contribute to that. But what you do see from these narratives in particular is that there is always a challenge, and there is not just a success story, there is also a trajectory that is quite complex, that has different layers to it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much. We have, I think, 5 minutes. I was just wondering if you could throw some light about, so much of this is temporary as well,
Yeah.
and I'm coming this from a personal experience because I know as people in the Assamese media industry, and
Mm.
like all film media industry, it's a brutal industry. People don't emerge unscathed from that industry in terms of having body image issues, mental health issues, let alone financial and other things. I know people who at 21, 22 get completely fascinated. It is easy for them to take risks at that point of time. They're brilliant individuals, but they wouldn't study
Mm.
or finish their degree, but they would go to the film industry without realizing that it is an Assamese film industry. It's not Bollywood or Hollywood or even the South Indian film industry.
Yeah.
Uh, the initial attention, the adulation on social media, the thousands of followers that you get on social media, and then the advertisement contracts that you get, and at between 21 to 30, even till 20, probably early 30s, it is so attractive. But suddenly they realize that um, all this bodybuilding, all these strict food habits, it is replicated by someone who is younger, and they are now more preferred. I think this is the reality of most media industry.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
risks that these men have taken, and I'm talking only about men because your book concerns them, um, are enormous. And I know some people there who have left the industry, and they are working in farms right now, and some of them are at home, just living on their savings right now, and
Yeah.
financial and big precarity. So I was wondering if you met any of those, and what they do when they realize that this is all temporary, this is all going to be replaced by
Mm.
somebody who is new, somebody who is younger, somebody who is willing
Yeah.
to take more risks.
Yeah, I think, well, the thing, of course, the book captures about 10 years. I think I could, maybe 10 years from now, I'll have another book on the same sort of the follow up about getting old. The current generation is getting older. So there's one story in the book. In the first chapter, we meet Kishore, who we meet again in, I think, chapter 4, in Society on Steroids, where I continue how he's developing. He's been one of my oldest informants. I've known him for about a decade. First meeting him when he took me to Bandstand in Mumbai, where on Sunday the crowds would gather to wait for Salman Khan to emerge on the balcony and flex his muscles. He didn't do that on that particular Sunday, but it allowed us to talk about where he saw himself be in the years to come. More recently, I think when I met him last, one of the things he told me is that he's realizing that he's getting older, and that some of the things that have made him famous within his own Chembur community and outside in Bandra West, where he used to perform, as he calls it himself, in Gold's Gym, which is really one of these places where you'll find a lot of Bollywood wannabes as well, is that, in his 30s, he's realizing that the body is no longer in its 20s or in its teens. So he has to think about how he's going to continue. And that is, I think, something that we've always seen in the movie industry. And of course, until recently, it was very much a thing that female actresses were faced with. And where male actors not so much, and still this is the case, right? I mean, male actors in their 50s can still play a heartthrob character who is barely out of grad school, which you would never believe a female lead to do, because that simply doesn't happen. But it's definitely something that they're worried about as well, because they know that there's a shelf life to their bodies, and they need to, at some point, convert that bodily capital into a long-term capital where they can still say, well, I once achieved this bodily ideal. I was once able to do this. So the more successful aging bodybuilders have found a way to continuously reference to past accomplishments to make their bodies count. Yeah.
There's a question we have from Dharitri Priyadarshini. She's asking, please also tell us about instances of body dysmorphia
Yeah.
you had come across during your research. Great question, actually.
Yeah. So that definitely relates to the example I provided before of the informant who's an IT professional and who asks me, of all people, what he should be doing when he's the one with the chiseled body that is not unlike a Greek statue, but still doesn't think it's enough. And he's an IT professional, so he has a high-paying job. He's well educated. He has a wife and a family, and so there is no reason for him to take another health risk that is not going to result in an economic prosperity for his family. In fact, it's going to cost him a lot of money, and it's going to entail a health risk. And he's obviously not able to see the kind of body he already has. And I remember when I was crafting the book, at some point, I sent him a section of the book saying, well, this is where I describe you. And he responded back that he said, well, I actually had tears in my eyes reading it because I could never look at myself like that. And I think that kind of points at an issue. Yeah, indeed, that the way I would reflect on them, thinking as immensely accomplished, would not resonate home at all. They would just think like, yeah, but on stage, I don't look like that. I'm not nearly enough. So body dysmorphia is an incredibly big issue, not just in India, by the way, worldwide among men.
Have you, okay, there's another question. What caused you not to ponder about muscular women? Does this also mean that muscular men alone define the new middle class India? Yeah.
Listen, this is an excellent question. I started this research 10 years ago, and there was very little going on in terms of muscular women. So the bodybuilding competitions I would attend, the gyms I would visit, the informants I had, this was incredibly peripheral. And at that time, I decided to focus on men alone. This has obviously in recent years changed significantly. More recently, I did an online event with my friend Rita Singh, who is one of India's most accomplished bodybuilders, female bodybuilders. And we talked about this at length, actually, on how much that world has changed. She's in the book a little bit in relation to Samson Solomon, who is no longer with us. He was a very accomplished bodybuilder from Mumbai. And so, yeah, I think looking at the future, there's a lot of work to be done about female fitness trainers, female bodybuilders, because it's a rapidly developing field in India. It's really quite amazing how in recent years, bodybuilding competitions have all added female competitions to the lineup, where 10 years ago, this was definitely not the case.
Mm-hmm. It needs probably a certain amount of freedom for women also to get permission from home and in our society, right? To take part in this.
Well, obviously, the limited stories I know is that, yeah, of course, even more so than men, their stories are characterized with really fighting odds, patriarchy, expectations on how to look, what to do. I mean, posing in bikini, in high heels, on a stage, showcasing your muscular body in India, I mean, anywhere in the world already, that evokes a certain sentiment, a certain reaction, right? Where it deviates from what we expect women to look like, how we expect women to behave. And already challenging that particular aspect is quite something. Doing so in India, even more so.
I'm so keen to read a book about the journey of female bodybuilders in India. It would not only be inspiring to everyone, but definitely to women. The amount of odds female bodybuilders must have surpassed to actually reach where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that definitely stories there. Well, Rita Singh, whom I mentioned earlier, has come out quite outspokenly in the media in recent years about her own journeys. But there are quite a few others. Yeah, I see another question coming in from Kamala.
Yes, I'm going to read this, quickly read it out. Dharmendra, Sunny Deol, Sanjay Dutt, and Sunil Shetty also had their own impact on bodybuilders of their generation. Your intro chapter recognizes Salman Khan, Shah Rukh, and Amir only. Any reason for that?
All right, yeah, this is definitely a concern I've met more frequently. Why the cans? The three cans. So actually, throughout the book, I talk about quite a few other bodybuilders and actors as well, not just from Bollywood, also from Collywood, Tollywood, etc. Dharmendra. Various actors, and I actually Dharmendra I discuss also for being one of the earlier examples of a somewhat muscular body, but his trajectory is vastly different from what you see Amir and Shahrukh doing. The reason I foreground these three names is because they kind of point at three different movies that were crucial to the growth in the fitness industry. That every fitness trainer I would ever interview across India would always mention these movies. Pyarkya as the first one, second one, Om Shanti Om, third one, Gajini. These were, everybody agreed, the most three fundamental movies. They just happen to be the Khans. But if you look at other actors that followed along sort of these lines, like John Abraham or Hrithik Roshan or what's his name from that I discussed in the second chapter. So there are quite a few other actors who all in their own way, from foreign actor to like names I just mentioned from regional cinema, have also all done the same. But obviously that starting point, there is no denying the three Khans. I can't help that. But Kamala has actually just mentioned a few names. Dharmendra is one of them. We must realize that some of them, they were never, if they were celebrated for their bodies. Sanjay Dutt is, I guess, a case in point, but Dharmendra in particular, they came from the field of sports themselves and were then selected for the bodies they already have, not for the bodies they developed as part of their movies. And the way they were cast was also highly specific. One of the things that's so fascinating about current day Bollywood is that this whole muscular body doesn't really have a role to play in the storyline itself. It's an add-on, and it results in a separate storyline outside the movie. So when you look at foreign actor, for instance, in Baak Milkha Baak, he plays a runner, right? Outside the movie, he's actually, what the story that Farhan is telling is of his own bodily transformation to become the actor. And that becomes part of the attraction of the movie. That didn't happen at the time of Sunny Deol and Sanjay Dutt and etc. So that has really changed.
In fact, in Dangal, there is an entire documentary, like a short documentary on Amir Khan's transformation.
Yes.
They promoted it as how Amir Khan transformed, like do pictures, and then people were interviewed, the cast, crew, and his trainer was, I think, there, and Amir Khan going through this painful experience, and then suddenly, like he emerges this young person.
And that is part of the marketing campaign itself,
Absolutely.
obviously, of showcasing what Amir is capable of, and that makes also what he is sort of advertising about himself as a highly accomplished actor. And in that sense, he's not that different from Hollywood actors who've always lost massive amounts of weight for roles. And so in that sense, he's actually, as a Bollywood actor, nudging more towards Hollywood. He's capable of that transformation of going through great lengths to be convincing on screen.
Yes, absolutely. There's a question about women readers of your book. Do you think women readers will read your book, and how have women readers responded to your book? I hope they do read.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, part of the case I try to make in the book is also relates to notions of masculinity and whether or not the muscular body equates the kind of toxic masculinity that we see in the street around the world. And so is it so that the muscular body equates that kind of toxic masculinity, the real sort of hardship women face on Indian streets where they are harassed, teasing, etc.? What I actually show is that the trajectory of the trainer usually already means having had to let go of all sorts of ideas of their ideas of where they come from and about women itself. And so, I mean, I see a comment of Abhishek come in. He's actually the cover model, and he said, "This is amazing. Thank you, Abhishek."
Okay.
But, so yeah, when it comes on to female readers, I think What they'll find interesting as well is to read about a male point of view where they show a lot of fragility, and a lot of openness about their own concerns. And in that sense, the book really deviates from this archetypical depiction of the Indian male as a deeply masculine and problematic one. Instead, seeing an Indian male emerge who is very much in tune with all the concerns of Indian society.
Right. I think you also had two women editors who commissioned and worked with you. So I was wondering, I'm sure they have brilliant things to say. They love your book. What did Ajita and Kartika say as when they commissioned your book? Because there's a question of women readers. So I was tying that up actually.
Yeah. I think it was absolutely wonderful working with Ajita as an editor who's Bangalore based, and I've had the most brilliant conversations. I mean, she's superb that way. And I think Kartika initially read the draft, and she really wanted to do the book, and she's obviously Context's editor. Context is a publisher. I think one of the fun things with that was, and it was a question for me as well, because in the end, I am also male, right? I'm writing about other men, but I'm well aware of all these questions of sexuality and gender because of my own position, where I come from, having lived and worked in India, etc. So I was very keen, and I was very blessed to have an editor and a publisher who were both female, because I also wanted to hear from them, like, how do you feel about the book? Is this the book that you want to read? Do you feel that I've missed something? Because the one thing that happens as an anthropologist when you're spending so much time on your topic is you live your topic. You know your informants, you know the predicaments they face, the hardship, and all these different things, but you don't know your reader yet. So how will the reader receive it? And in that sense, I think I really thank you for the question also, how do you think women will read this book? I think that's incredibly important, yes. I'm very keen to hear feedback, so keep sending me feedback.
Yes, absolutely. There's a final question, probably this one. Why did you select this particular bodybuilder, and why there is a tiger as well for the cover page? So that's the question I wanted to ask. Well, very attractive cover, of course.
Okay, so the simple thing is, at some point, I was talking to my friend Kop Shiva, who's a Bangalore-based photographer, and I mentioned a book, and I said, I'm looking for a picture that captures the whole story. And he'd heard about the story before, and he said, I do have a picture from my series on internal migrants in Bangalore, and he had taken pictures of these men and women, by the way. It's a whole series, and do check it out. Kop Shiva has a brilliant website. And in that, he shows basically internal migrants who have made Bangalore their home. And one thing I like so much about this picture is that the tiger is attacking from behind. But Abhishek, the cover model, is clearly not giving a damn in that sense. You know, he's posing, he's proud of his body, he knows who he is, he knows he can make it anywhere. And that's the whole point I was trying to send home with this book as well, is that these are men who are here to stay in middle-class India and urban India. They've made middle-class India their own, and they're upwardly mobile, and they're proud of who they are. And that's why the picture is what it is.
Thank you, Michael. It's 2 minutes left, so I'm not going to add another question. I'm just about to finish reading your book. It is very well narrated and very riveting, and it's definitely giving me a new side of India that I would have probably never gone and explored. You know, I mean, I'm the kind of person who stays miles and miles away from gyms and bodybuilders.
maybe this opens up the opportunity to think a bit more like, should I?
Maybe, I should think about it probably right now. And I'm never going to have a measuring scale on my kitchen. I love my food. You should go to my Instagram and see that.
Very, very smart thing. Like, measuring scales in kitchens are not, not joy makers.
Okay, thank you very much for this, for being so generous, for answering these questions in such great detail. I hope people enjoy the conversation. Please buy Michael's book. This is the book. You cannot miss it.
This is the book.
Yes, absolutely. highly recommend it. This is the book. You just can't miss this book. This is
Thank
a
you.
brilliant book, well narrated. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aruni, and have a wonderful day ahead, evening ahead, wherever you are.
You too. You too. Should we just log off or?
I think so, right? Bye.